I'm going to put people through a computer veterans training class, and they start the course and some people not through, and then test as the training class build
We don't need you around here.
authoritative desires in
Real close.
Back over with
Well, not
those
yet.
guys.
Kind of breaks.
here that you could put people through. You could then take this whole thing and take the evangelicals and put them through some sort of
So you've got a whole bunch of research questions. Pick out something there and focus it on. Get out of this big complex stuff. And that was shoot you to see your topics evaluation, that's project 3, that's project 1.
I learned one yesterday.
Tell me if this is right. What elements of the experience?
That's the
You're looking for elements that cross over
no, that's the
between government work, civil.
My field, for example,
Okay.
songs, it's going to open me up to God. That makes me interested to listen to service.
But do you want the songs to be on the same theme as the
I'm not sure. I'm asking a question.
Right.
They might tell me, okay, this song that opens me up to the Lord.
You're just, you're citing these books and you're writing a library.
There isn't as much variation.
All along. You need to pick out something and pull out a piece out and focus the question on it. You're just grabbing big wads or something.
There you go.
Would you get out your report sheet, of course, the syllabus? And on the third page, I am not worried at this point about my task between now and tomorrow afternoon to read through and mark up those papers that you just worked through yourself. And don't worry yourself if yours looks a little bit chaotic. It'll look more chaotic when I get through it. But what encourages me is that I've got a lot there to work with that's positive. And I can't see many cases where we're really going to have much serious repair problems. But I've obviously got to get you a lot of feedback to make sure we're launched well, because that will shape what you do for your first assignment. The awkward problem is that if you're not already well on with your first problem, your first project, tomorrow morning, you've got a really big problem. Because we're going to do a workshop on that thing tomorrow. We're going to do a lot of work right in here to finish it up. And then across the weekend, you'll be able to gloss it up. And it'll look pretty good. It'll look pretty good. I'll give you a lot more detail about it tomorrow. But I've got to give you enough detail tonight to tell you where to get started and how. Again, what sections of the proposal are the most crucial in terms of your learning in this course? 1 and 3. Obviously, all 5 are important, and I would be delighted to see you do the best you can with each of the 5. But I'm just telling you in advance that I'm not going to be terribly excited if I have a week 5 or week 4 or even a week 2. As long as I got a strong 1 and a strong 3. Or at least pretty strong. I am always impressed, and this is intended to threaten. Okay, this is close. I haven't threatened you before, all week, have I?
Third day.
Yeah, right. Not till the third day. I mean this in a sharing of confidence kind of a tone, not a critical tone. I'm always impressed how well those first papers look, even after this kind of a brief, fast, high-stress launching. I'm really disappointed in the first papers. And I'm saying that so that I can then go on and say, this is probably gonna be the first time. No, I don't see any reason why this would be the first time. I think your papers are gonna be fine. But I'll tell you what, you can put in about 2 hours and a half tonight, or more. You will probably get a lot more out of tomorrow. Now, when you do that 2 hours and a half or more tonight, get right to it. Don't wander around, and don't sit and stare at the paper, and don't fret about what can I look at that will tell me how to do this. Just start doing it. 2 or 3 guidelines. In a proposal or a formal research report, every section or chapter starts on a new page. So that means you're going to have a minimum of how many pieces of paper? 5. Thank you very much. Plus 1. What is that? Bibliography. Thank you very much. Good. Now we're in 2. On the first, you need a heading. For this exercise, I will allow you, because there's no use in wasting paper, allow you to start out by putting the name of your study. Now, the name of the study has to clearly indicate the topic, which is one reason we look at topic. But it also hints at or gives a general idea of what the problem is. And if it is a particularly local study, that heading, that title for the study would also say, in one way or another, where it was done. Now, if you get over 15 words for the title, you're really overdoing it. Even in dissertations, I've always used 20 words. If you go over, I've got students that have gone over 20 because I'm not a bear ultimately. And people have a good reason to do more than 20, fine, you know. I always tell students never over 250 pages in a dissertation. I had one guy come in with 570, and even the dean of our college told me that he wasn't going to sign it because it was too long. And I had to actually argue for it because it was an extremely good piece of work. And I told the dean that he really didn't have any right to reject it until he read it. And I had him right by the ears. He wasn't about to read that one. So he agreed that my logic was good and passed it. That dissertation, by the way, is in the doctoral reading room. It's blue. It's by a man by the name of John Stewart. Biggest one I've ever had. And it's not your model. Okay? I am perfectly happy with dissertations that are 125, 150 pages. I'm not a bear for long, long stuff. But I am a bear for thorough stuff. And that's one reason I don't like to see people overbite. Even in this exercise, don't overbite. Don't make the heading sound like you're going to discover all truth remaining to be discovered in this universe and the next. That's not a good time. Because at some point I may begin to believe you, you know, and then I've got to see a lot of evidence. Okay, your heading, you can make a title page if you want to, or you go glosses it. But anyway, that and your name, and then chapter 1, and what do you say? Section 1, excuse me. Section 1, Arabic numerals, preferably. You know what Arabic is? That's not Roman. Yeah. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Something new. And just put section 1, then what? The research problem. The research problem or research problem, either way, with or without the D.
On the
On the same line?
On the same line. Which is why I'm letting you stick it right under the title, save the page. Okay, on the next page, how does that one start?
Section 2.
Section 2. The old name for it, I'll have to tell you the background of this, the old name for it was literature review, or review of the literature. I do not recommend that. Again, it's like too much like, you know, all the information in the world, well reviewed. It's literature review. Today's world has too much literature in it. when I was a doctoral student, things were beginning to break over. But prior to that, it was mid-century, prior to that, a doctoral student was responsible, now listen, for all literature on his or her topic. All literature on his or her topic. And usually in a first and second language. Now, you can be thankful that you're coming along after the information explosion. Amen. Because now we almost err in the opposite direction and don't really expect much. But I was in that transitional period where we all cheated. We knew what was expected of us, we knew it was impossible. So we found ways to bluff. And, but I don't like the title Review of the Literature for that reason. It's too big. Precedent literature, I love it. Precedent literature. In other words, there's some precedent there for the study you're doing. And if there's not a precedent for what you're doing, you can't show a connection. Don't stick it in there. One of my favorite questions when I arrive at a doctoral oral where I'm an auxiliary member and I really haven't read the Blumen dissertation, one of my learned questions is, I will open to anywhere in chapter 2 and I say, will you explain the relationship between Deacon's work in 1944 and the research questions that you're using? And that absolutely shows the student that you really are a dangerous person. But that's a fair question. If a person has got it in there, he ought to be able, or she ought to be able to answer, what's the connection? So it's a fair question, but precedent literature. Now, for our purposes here, that is one of the sections that can be skinny. But gee, I'd like to know that there's something that you've read and something that you remember from it that relates to what you're doing. Because a high percentage of you people are in the second half of your doctoral program. You told me. And I would expect people at this stage to have some cognizance of literature in the things that they're interested in. And let's face it, folks, you have chosen the topic for this paper. Fair enough? Am I unreasonable? Now, that may keep some of you awake another night or two, and you won't have it all ready for tomorrow. For tomorrow, don't worry about it. Get it the weekend. But don't leave chapter 2 or section 2 naked for Monday, please. For tomorrow, that's not going to be our big deal. But put the page in there anyway. Third page. What does it say? And by the way, I'm assuming that these are one-page sections, which is a skimpy assumption. You will have longer than that, but I'm going to refer to them as separately. Okay, page 3. Section 3. What's it say on it? Section 3.
Methodology.
Research procedure is, I think, a little more refined than methodology. Your methodology is perfectly satisfactory, and many authors will prefer that. And as you've noticed, there's a great deal of difference between some of the things I'm suggesting and some of the things that Campbell, that Borg and Dahl are suggesting. And I simply say, right. And you will discover that everybody teaching research has some different tricks to what they do and how they do it. My tricks are based on what you really have to have under your belt in order to learn the rest as you go through experiences later. And I have some very clear opinions about that I think makes sense, but I wouldn't want to debate. Section 4. Section 4, what is in it? Findings. The easiest title is findings. Some people use analysis of findings, and that's okay too. Because one of the things you will put in there is your analysis procedure as well as your analysis itself. Now for a proposal, do you really have analyzed findings to show? Think about it. For a proposal. No. In the best of all possible worlds, with oodles of weeks to prepare, your findings chapter is going to be, it's going to be skimpy, because you haven't got any yet. So what do you fill section 4 of your proposal with? Old newspapers. No. You fill it with a thoroughgoing description of how you will analyze your data. And you also present some sample displays of your data. Like, for example, graphs or charts or lists. You say, my gosh, I thought we don't have any data to put in those graphs and charts. Right, you put in absolutely naked graphs and charts. Indicate what the axes will be, because you know what data you're going after. So as you summarize, you're going to have certain topics. And for verbal description, as you're doing in interviews, you're going to need to talk about something you haven't studied yet, and that is verbal analysis. Now, I would suggest you at least take a look at what's said about verbal analysis in your textbook, and review that again before Monday. That's the place where you're going to need a little touch of it. But when you get through 923, you'll be on top of that literature and that procedure, and that's where we expect you to learn the stuff you'll need for descriptive study analysis, section 4. So this, of course, is not the be-all and end-all of your research career. Section 5. What? Conclusions. Let me stop at this point and make sure we have some sense of the difference between findings and conclusions. Let me give you a statement, and you tell me whether it's a finding or a conclusion. It is cloudy outside. You satisfied that's a finding? Temperature is dropping. I think it's going to rain.
Conclusion.
Right. In other words, what do my findings add up to? What's the judgment call that I make on the basis of those findings? Now, your last chapter then has your judgment calls in it. For some of you, for example, who are just desperately eager to get on building a new curriculum for this or that or the other, and how can I use my research to build my curriculum? You can't. You can do your research on things you need to know more about before you build your curriculum. Things about your subjects, things about the needs that they'll have when they get in the field, and all the rest of that. Can I mention this curriculum that I want to build? Sure, you can even give an outline for it. Oh, where do I do that?
Conclusion.
Sure. In other words, that's part of your judgment calls on the basis of your data. Does that make sense? Now then, you get the impression then that chapters 2, 3, and 4 are very, very objective. Section 2, 3, and 4, chapter 2, 3, 4. And there may be more room for a little more subjective, opinion-based stuff in the, what I call the envelope. The envelope of research is chapters 1 and 5. And that's why I call doing research an excursion into the unnatural. It's an excursion into the unnatural. Anybody figure that one out? What am I driving at? What is the natural state of the human being? Objective or subjective? You better believe it. Don't let the psychologists and the MDs tell you it's subjective. They don't even live that way either. To get to objectivity, you must make a transition. To come back up out of objectivity, you must make another transition. The names of those two transitions are Section 1 and Section 5. That make sense? And while you're in this unnatural state, you're objective about everything. 2, 3, and 4. There is a subjectivity that shows through in terms of what you decided to do your research on. In other words, right from the word go, there's a subjective evidence there. What you say about this in terms of your research concern, why this is important, that's going to show up. Has some subjectivity in it. But as you go along in Section 1, you get yourself into transition so that by the time you hit Chapter 2, Section 2, you are really saying, like Sergeant Friday in the old shows on television, just the facts, ma'am.
Is it acceptable to use I?
No. Never. Never. Not with me. Not doing research. Unless you are quoting a person who has said I. But your eye should be reserved for when you're writing theological texts. Do you know that there is no literature that is more extensively self-oriented in its writing than theology? That's fact. You pick up any theological text written by any noted theologian, you will find that person writing in the first person. You find responsible text written in any other field, you will find a minimum of first person, and usually used to create certain kind of contrast or emphasis. When I'm writing an article for a journal, I will quite often start off in a first person about 3 sentences just to get into it, so that there's a kind of a sense of where I'm coming from. And then I'll just stay right there in my third person, and then come out at the end with maybe 1 or 2 sentences of first person, or maybe one final declaration in the first person. Thus, I'm sure going to pattern my decision on so-and-so as a kind of a subjective final statement. Now, that comes out of research training, but let me tell you something. That pattern is shifting. There's more and more first-person literature in all fields. So a lot of people will come back to me and say, well, you're not really up to date. Well, I read pretty well, and I'm up to date. I know it's becoming more common, but it's also true that today's literature in all fields is much more narcissistic. You know what that means? Stuck on oneself. And theological literature as a whole is profoundly narcissistic. Profoundly. And I could name some eminent theologians, and to their faces I have said, you know, you make your work sound like a kind of an exercise in making yourself feel really good. Because of all this I, me, my, our, we, and all this stuff. Try hard to learn how to write some other way. Now, you say, well, I want to be up to date, and I think that's the trend, so I want to get on the wet bandwagon. Let me tell you something. If you want to get published, don't go that route. Because the transition isn't going to be fast enough for you and your career. It's coming slower than that. And furthermore, the most solid literature in every field, except theology, is still carefully written in third person. Keep the I, me, my, our out of it, unless you are perforce talking about something that is essential to the story to tell it in first person form. Because there are many times when that's not even the case. You don't have to tell stories in first person form. That's just a kind of a rule of thumb, if you don't mind. Try hard. You need to learn the discipline of not writing first person.
You told us in the meeting yesterday, or the day before, that the research concern was more personal sort of statement. So
and that's a great place to practice writing it in third person and still keeping it with that degree of subjectivity. See, subjectivity does not increase or decrease in terms of what voice you're using, what person you're using.
Do you refer to your own experience then as a part of using your training settings?
In a footnote. Use all the first person you want in a footnote. And that's a good thing to do. In other words, if you want to connect yourself with it, with a historical moment, drop that into a footnote on page, not at the end, but a footnote right there using an asterisk, and drop it right in place. Just practice not using first person. It's hard and adds a little extra jolt to this exercise and all the work for the course, but you're going to thank me someday. Oodles of people have. And I was just telling you about this manuscript I got just several weeks ago that I just wrote the foreword for it. Did I mention that with you? Written by Victor Kroll, one of my Michigan State Ghanaians, who has been, he's worked his way up in theological education in Africa. He's been dean at Jos Seminary and also in Nairobi Graduate School of Theology. He's just written a profound book on theological education and the present dilemma. And it is the finest book I have ever held in my hands on theological education, its history and its problems. The finest. In my foreword, I say, this is the book I wish I had written. But I feel good that I haven't written it, that I didn't write it, because Victor has written it better than I could have. And he is so careful about those things. And he's so careful about the rest. It has just a finished polish to it. Unbelievable. Close to 400 pages. Really whiz bang. Well, anyway, that's what makes me say, look, I run a few people through the mill, okay? I've got a few people out there who are deans and presidents, outstanding authors, and so forth. Or Jim Pluteman. Some of these people who are just where you are and have a point in their lives. And trust me. Okay. Yes, sir.
Since we don't have the actual findings yet, on the conclusion section for this exercise, you want our best guesses?
Good question. Good question. One of the rules in research writing, even when you're doing exercises, is don't predict. Don't predict. Now, you can talk about your intentions, but you don't talk about your findings as if they had been done. It's a tip-off when you do that you already have a pretty strong bias, and you may not be objective enough to carry this out. So if you're in the habit of doing that for an exercise in here, you may turn in a proposal to your committee that slips over and begins predicting. In your committee, in your dissertation, you're going to say, whoa, what is this? Oh, I think that's the way it's going to turn out. You're the wrong person to do this study. That's why we keep talking about research questions that are things you've got to find out, not things you already know. That's called a sermon. All right? So what do you do in section 5? You talk briefly, quarter page, about the kinds of things that should be more clear. In other words, think categories of topics. Got it? That should be more clear after you've done your research. And that one right there is about a quarter page, and that's it. And for this first exercise, section 4 is probably going to be a page to 2. Section 3 is going to be somewhere between 5 and 7. Section 2 is going to be, let's hope, 2. Section 1 is going to be, let's say, 3. What does that add up to? 13. Okay, how's that sound? And some of those pages aren't full. Some of those pages aren't full because you're starting a new heading with each page.
What are your format requirements? Turabian?
You absolutely must use the institutional requirement for doctoral students in education or mission, which is A, Turabian, and B, the complementary handbook, the rest of the story that is locally produced. And you use the new scientific part of Turabian. Turabian still talks about the 2 modes. The old, what's called the old librarian's style, where footnotes are numbered, and you put a lot of obsit, you put a lot of ibid, and a lot of other Latin to make the thing look kind of foreign. And then there's the new scientific, which allows you to do things about half as much time and be done with it, and also be able to use in a computer, picking up things and putting them from here to there, which if your footnotes are all numbered, they have to renumber everything. It's all screwed up. If you use the parenthesized notation, it's like that. And you can pick up the whole section and it'll go with you, and it's not numbered. And that's clear as a bell in your handbooks and materials. You will make a lot of mistakes on your first paper. You will. You will. I know that. You know that. Do the best you can. Second paper, you're going to make less mistakes. This is a learning exercise. This is a 5-finger exercise. We're going to do the best we can. It's under pressure of time. The real issue is substance and logic. The technical, layout, format, even spelling is not the primary issue. But if you think I'm going to let a misspelled word go through without marking it, you are wrong. I am a bear on spelling, I am a bear on punctuation and grammar. And I do not give any quarter to people for whom English is a second language. I do not, for the simple reason that you are here by your choice to get the best you could get out of an education in the United States. And you knew the language was English. And you are going to go home and people are going to say to you, that is what English looks like? And you're going to say, well, you know, I never was very good at English. Do the best you can. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mark everything I find wrong. Style matters, spelling matters, grammar matters, capitalization problems. And that's why it takes me a long while to read a paper. I will mark the living daylights out of something until I get to a systematic problem. Systematic means that you always do it. And then I'll quit. You know, I've already said it 2 or 3 times, I'll quit. So I won't mark everything. I'll just mark the first 5 or 6 cases of it, right? Oh, why do I do that? Why do I do that?
Simple.
No, it is not simple. Why do I do that? I am deeply committed to your competencies. Give me a break. I'm trying to help you. Now, what I'm not going to do is base my judgment of the worth of your product on anything other. Now, don't take advantage of me on this, but this is the truth. Anything other than the substance and the style with which you handle that substance within the proposal itself. So, for example, in your case, if I mark 3 misspellings on the first page, in your case, I mark 30 on the first page. I'm going to give this guy, let's say, because the substance of his paper is good, it's nicely done, I'm going to give him an A- or an A or a B+ or something, you know, like that. But in your case, what am I going to give you?
That's how good the content is.
Assume it's equal to his. What am I going to give him? You got 30 misspellings on the first page.
Same grade.
You give him the same grade I would give him, if the content and the substance is equal. That's what I'm evaluating. So why do I go to the trouble of marking all that mess?
But to get it.
Trying to help you. I have discovered that in many institutions of education today, for one reason or another, and I've got a private hypothesis about why this is, many faculty people don't take the time and effort to mark things for students so that they can see their errors. Or at best, they make a generalization, work on spelling. That doesn't help a whole lot when you don't realize that you always leave out L in portable. It's kind of nice to have them marked so you say, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. Now, computers are kind of helping a little bit because computers guarantee that you're at least flagged on words that aren't spelled right, right? But what computer spell programs don't do, will tell you whether you use the right word or the right version of the word, right? So we still got a problem. And I don't catch them all. I'm not perfect. In fact, I am so bad that my wife edits everything I write. Everything I write, including most of my letters. My wife edits them. She used to be a newspaper editor, and she is very good. And she is constantly on my back about using, for example, too many dashes. Oh, she hates dashes. By the way, dash. How do you use a dash? How do you type a dash? Anybody know?
Space, dash.
No. 2 hyphens. Rabbit. Bot. Not. Peter. 2 hyphens, no spaces. How do you make that hyphen? 1 hyphen, no spaces. Please? Please? Okay. And that's it, that's in the style books. A lot of things in the style books. I'll have a lot more feedback for you after I've seen some of the stuff that you're writing, even tomorrow, but as we go along, and I'll feed it in, and you'll have to take more and more account of it. This course gets harder as you go along, because there's more to keep track of. But you get a lot more confident as you go along. I can see the confidence building today, because as I was rounding the room here today, I was seeing a very great improvement over yesterday. Not only that, I was impressed that very few groups really, flagged me over all that early and all that insistently, because you were doing a good job helping each other. And you had a good sense that each other had validity. By the way, you do have now the addresses for everybody. And somebody didn't get one, because I only ended up with 19. Who didn't get an address sheet?
And
You didn't? And you didn't? Well, that means that somebody else has stolen. Okay. Is that an extra?
That's an extra.
Ooh, great.
We can live with one between us, yes?
Can you? Oh, good. Then everybody can go home with one. That's great. I'll have to make, my secretary, I don't know why she came up. Oh, I do too. I said I need enough to hand out. This is a new secretary, and she hasn't quite caught on to my shorthand for what I really want. And I said, I need enough for everybody. Well, what does she do? She finds her 19 names on there, and she does 19 of them, not even one for me.
You know what? I'm not in it, so that might be the
You
reason.
didn't turn the card in.
Yes, I did.
Did you? All right, I'll jump her for that too, because
That might be why you got 19 back.
that's probably,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I noticed there were only 19 names on it when I got.
I thought maybe you were telling me something.
Oh, he was.
Very subtle.
Very subtle.
I usually more subtle than that. Okay. All right, now, what all do you put in section 1? I'm going to ask this with reference to 1 and 3, because this is my parting shot for you, so you can go away with some little more concrete idea of what try to write to. What do you put in 1?
State your problem.
Okay, that's a place for definition of terms, the place, right? Okay. What do you mean by definition of terms? Using a real complicated word like ambulance. Ambulance, period. A vehicle used to haul the ailing, period. Now what's wrong with that? Look, ambulance is in the dictionary, in exactly the use you're using of it. You save that for words that you are using in any way that is special or unusual. And for example, if you decided to say church leader, that needs defining. Do you know that the word church leader, the term church leader, doesn't mean the same thing to everybody? If you got up and used it right now, I wouldn't have the foggiest idea how you're using it until I asked you, are you including laymen as church leaders? If you talk to a Presbyterian, the Presbyterian will typically not use the word church leader of anybody but a clergy. And the same thing is true of Roman Catholics. So you have to define how that word is being used. So any word that you are using in a particular sense, or any word that is not going to be known to a general reader. For example, a foreign city, a non-American city that you want to describe a certain way, or the name of a certain district of a city. You need to put that in your definition. Now, is definitions the place you start? No. No. So let me put definitions down here, and let's see what else we might put ahead of it. Where might you start? The research problem is the name of the chapter. We really don't need to repeat that.
Introduction.
Explanation of.
Let me tell you about introduction. Where would you put the introduction? Usually at the start, right? Can you think of any other place you might use it? I can't either. Therefore, are you sure you need to name it?
Or it needs to
That's
be-
one of the most useless captions you can possibly use.
Are you just talking about headings, or are you talking about what you need?
I'm talking, good, boy, you are really sharp. She is gonna protect you from evil. She's a keeper. Now, make your point, because you just caught me before I snapped your ears off.
No, I just am wondering, when you ask what comes first, whether you meant just the title of the section we're listing, or are we listing what you actually write, the first paragraph?
And what's the answer? Before a first heading, under this one,
Yeah.
there needs to be some text, which is in, no, not the abstract, no, that's something else. Save that for later. Introduction is what often people put, and then what they do is immediately violate one of the standing style rules. You can't have two headings of any case, no matter how big ones and little ones. You can't have one heading immediately following another. And by the way, in theology texts and in some other fields as well, that is violated all the time. So what you get is oodles and oodles of headings that follow each other, and they kind of, whoops, where are we going to read anything? I want to get these outline. Do not number the components of your outline. That's another habit, especially from some countries. People in certain countries learn every time they make an outline to number every item, and you get a 3.1, 3.2, 3.5, 4.1, 4.2. Just write. This one, don't use as a heading. Don't even mention it. Just do it. And that's why her point was so well taken. All right, now where might you start? Statement of the problem. Just don't use the same thing. So statement of the problem would be a fine way, but that's not the only place to start. Now you think about it. We've talked about it, and this would be a lovely place to throw it in, right there. Bang, what I got. That makes a great place to start. After a little introductory sentence or two or three, then go to research concern. Let that drive you on then to your statement of the problem. All right? What follows statement of the problem?
Question.
Research question. And at that time, quite typically, you're ready for definitions. Where would you go from there, or what else might we add in this chapter to make it tell the whole story?
Some sense of where you're going with
In what sense?
it. An overview of the process.
Okay, overview of the plan procedure. Sometimes I substitute the word inquiry at this point, partly because I just absolutely love the word inquiry. Review of the inquiry procedure. The point is the procedure. Okay? Now, this is where you give a synoptic view of what section?
Section
3. Because you see, 2 is going to be precedent literature, and 3 is going to be research procedure. Now, if I'm giving you here an overview of the inquiry procedure or of the planned procedure, it is quite literally an overview of what you're going to do in the study. And this is a rather good place to synoptically tune the reader in to where you're going with your research. I recommend, however, that you not write this before you write 3. You need to think it through in more detail before you commit yourself here. In 3, what are you going to have in there? We're just going to jump to this one now.
Back up.
Sure.
What do you do with, like limitations of the study and general feasibility and things like that?
Those are the finer points of one.
Okay.
Those are the finer
So
points
they
of one.
do belong in one?
They do belong in one, there's no question, and there's no standard package of stuff that has to be there in addition to these things. But depending on the nature of the study, you may have sectional limitations, generalizability, a lot of other things. What I'm trying to do, and you probably begin to detect it, is I'm giving you a kind of a minimal skeleton so that we don't sprawl out and waste effort on a lot of other things. This is a 5-finger exercise. This is not a finely polished proposal. And your point is well taken, that that's where those other things would go. And you'll find in Morgenthau many, many illustrations of other stuff. And one of the things that you finally will find in Morgenthau, he was always, in the earliest days, careful to make all his illustrations standard. You got the impression in the early days that, boy, it had to be this way. That's the sequence of titles, and that's how you have to do it. Finally, he scrambled it up, because that's the real world. You never have things come out exactly the same. All right. What is going to be a good place to start here?
Description of population.
Huh?
Description of population.
I like to use the word description too, by golly, because that's what that section is. Description of the population. Now, let's just, that would not be your starting place for the chapter, by the way, but it's going to be in there. What would probably follow that?
Sampling procedure.
Ah, thank you. Sampling procedure, all right? Now let's back up a little bit and go to the top. Where would be a good place to start section 3? Let me tell you what the conflicting values are and why this is kind of a tricky question. You want minimum redundancy. You don't want to say the same thing more than you have to. So you don't want to have all of this stuff also appear here. And yet, you always write research for professionals. And professionals rarely read sequentially. They jump. Now, if a person is really deeply interested in how you understand this problem, how you define your terms and how you think about this, they're going to read chapter 1 very carefully. But somebody else comes along, in fact, more other someone else's will come along and jump right into chapter 3. So what is a good idea is to give them, in the beginning of 3, one piece out of all this. Now, that gives them background. It isn't a long statement. It may be exactly the way it appeared in section 1. Even though we try not for redundancy, that's okay there. Now, there's one other piece out of 1 that we're going to give and amplify. Because the guidance mechanism for our procedure is wrapped up in the research questions. Remember what we said the first day? The guidance mechanism for your thinking about procedure is your research questions if it's a descriptive study, and your hypothesis if it's a experimental. Right. Now then, here's where it happens. Right here, we should have put space for it. I'm sorry I didn't leave it out. Research questions. And in many cases, you also add a section that you don't have in 1 called operational questions. And what is an operational question? In order to answer that research question, I've got to ask these questions get this body of information. For example, my research question is, how much growth has occurred in the enrollment at Trinity Seminary in the last 5 years? That's my research question. Can you imagine what my operational questions might be? Go ahead.
What was the enrollment 5 years ago?
What was the enrollment in 1993? What is the enrollment in 1998? Those are operational questions. I've got to go get that. I've got to go get that. That's the word operational. My operations are, I've got to go get that. I've got to get that. I've got to find this. I've got to find that. I've got to ask this. I've got to ask that. Those are operational questions. Now, why do I have to ask all those things? Because I have to accumulate that combination of raw data in order to answer my research question. Does that make sense? Now, for the purpose of this project, you may, but don't have to get into operational questions. You may, but you do not have to, and I'm not going to treat a paper as deficient if it doesn't get into operational questions.
You mean for tomorrow or Monday?
For Monday. Yeah, all my criteria are ultimate criteria for the paper. For tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned, you just get started on this and move as far as you can on the most basic stuff in 1 and 3. Okay. I'll show you where that is in a moment. All right? We're just about done. What else do we need in 3? Instruments. Very good. As soon as we get done with this description of population and sampling, then we need instruments. Now, what is an instrument?
Tool to measure.
It's the protocol for the interview.
It's to fulfill the operation.
Right. It's the stuff you've got to. It's the formats that you use. If you're asking a questionnaire, it's the questionnaire. If you're using a questionnaire. If it's an interview, it's the protocol. It's called the protocol. Protocol. I've said that one a few times. If it's an observation, it's the observation guide or the observation plan, so-called. Those are instruments. If it's a questionnaire, and it won't be in most of your cases for this study, it's a questionnaire, it would be the questionnaire itself, the questionnaire items. And then in that section, you literally have to rationalize everything you ask. Why are you asking it? What will it give you? Why do you need that? You light up the purpose of the research problem, the research questions. Why do you need that? You literally have to justify every piece. And that's where you do it. And you define and describe your instruments. All right, what else do we need in 3?
One of the points about the qualitative, I learned that sometimes the interview procedures are emergent.
Yes.
Now, this is just a starting guess, starting point. I mean.
That's right.
Okay.
What you do in a proposal, in order to convince your sponsors, and all researchers have sponsors, your institution, your employer, your doctoral committee, to convince them that you have some sense of what you're looking for and where you're going with it, you make some estimates of what it is that you are looking to get at and how. So you see this as estimates. All right? There's one other thing we need to estimate. It's a biggie. And once we get to that one, we're pretty well done with it. What's the other one? It's a big one and 3.
Any statistical analysis?
We could say that for 4, because that's going to be analysis.
Time and resource, money.
Did you notice this over here?
Design. Maybe don't reveal the design or what you're going to do. Or
And this isn't going to be the overview, this is going to be the
Design.
expanded description of design. We really generally call that procedure. And a procedure is quite often a long, multi-section narrative that says we're going to do this, then this, then this, then this. We've already said how we got the sample, so we don't have to go over that again. We've already said what the instruments are, we don't have to go over that again. But we do have to say how we're going to use it. And we're going to have to say something about the time frame in which we use it. Does that make sense?
Why wouldn't you put that, say, under the research problem?
what you're going to do.
Because the research problem is simply the way to get this whole thing clear and started. But until you have these pieces of background, this won't make a whole lot of sense unless you interrupt it all the time and bring that data in here. You could logically say, let's make the whole thing just describe the procedure, step 1, step 2, step 3. But that's an inefficient way to do it. You get greater efficiency this way. And furthermore, there's a certain amount of conventionality here. People are expecting to find things falling more or less in this area. Now, as I suggested a moment ago, there are all sorts of other things that might, ought, could be there. But this is the backbone. And in general, it's the sequence in which the backbone is usually presented. Any questions?
I'm not clear on the procedure. It's basically the time sequence of what we're going
You
to
can
do.
think of it as a time sequence. You can think of it that way. You're going to, first of all, go to this group, do these 50 interviews, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do that. So it's literally step by step. Yep. Describe what you're going to do, step by step. Happy? Comfortable that you can get at it? Well, what are you going to bring tomorrow?
Lots of
You
coffee.
bring everything you can do in 2.5 hours to 3 hours. And it's going to be please, please, please on paper. I want to thank you very sincerely that every one of you today brought your first written work on paper, ready to share, ready to go. That made it a lot smoother, because you probably have already noticed that when people talk about these things, they generally diverge from the paper that they've already got written. And they talk about far more than you need to hear. Have you noticed that? That every time I ask somebody to repeat something that he got in his paper, and he gets away from his paper and starts free-labbing, you know, what you get is a lot of words. And it's so much better to have things clear and shareable. Thank you. I also thank you very much for your high level of attentiveness and your obvious motivation. I am delighted. I was fretting yesterday. I felt that I had not done a few things right, and I'm sure I didn't. Consequently, we ran into some real bumps yesterday. Today has been a real delight. A hard day. Generally, I think day 2 and day 3 is the toughest thing in this seminar. So we're past the toughest, and today wasn't all that tough. So I think we're going to make it big. Everybody happy? Everybody worried? Good. But don't worry a whole lot. Just enough to keep you cool.